Okay, we are live. Hello, everyone. This is the Apostate Prophet. Thanks, everyone, for coming. I'm here with someone that we all waited very long for, which is no other than David Wood. David, why don't you just introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm David Wood. How y'all doing?
Well, for those who don't know David Wood, he has his own channel, which is called Act 17 Apologetics, and he's been doing quite a great job over there with around 260,000 subscribers right now, I think, with a very big reach, talking about Islam, mainly all the problems around Islam, while also defending against some other groups that we will also talk about. David, I think it would be best if you just started by introducing your own channel, your activities, what you are aiming to do, and so on.
Well, I have a Christian apologetics channel, so kind of for those of you who don't know, apologetics a lot of people have a negative view of apologetics nowadays, but apologetics it comes from a Greek word apologia, which means give a defense, which refers to a court defense, where the prosecution would bring forth its charges, and then the defense would get up and speak and say, here's my response to the charges against my client here. And that response was called an apologia. So apologetics is just giving a response to objections or giving a defense of what you believe. So basically everyone who defends their position on any issue is doing a kind of apologetics. But I tend to focus a lot on Islam. Just a lot of my friends over the years were Muslims. I ended up dealing with Islam quite a bit, and I kind of stuck with Islam because there's not enough people dealing with it. You're talking about like a fifth of the world's population, and not a lot of people deal with it. So yeah, that's basically what I do on my channel.
All right. Would you say that this apologetics, I mean, the main reason behind it, the main motivator in the beginning was it just to strengthen your position on Christianity, or was it mainly a response to Islam? I have seen that you included a lot of discussions with atheists too. What was the main motivator behind that?
Well, that's how I became a Christian. So my background was atheism. So I became a Christian after looking into some of the main art. Well, I actually thought I was coming up with these arguments. Later, I found out that people had been using these arguments for centuries, but I thought I was coming up with the arguments as I was studying Christianity back when I was 19 and 20 years old. Back then I didn't even know what apologetics was. I was just I ended up studying it, and I was studying apologetics books, not realize I just thought I was reading books about Christianity. And then yeah, I eventually started kind of focusing on that. That's just what was interesting to me. In college, I did philosophy, and apologetics is kind of like very closely related to philosophy. So lots of Christian philosophers are also apologists.
Yeah, I saw your video about your background, your testimony about how you were an atheist and how you became a Christian afterwards. Could you? I think it was very brilliantly done. It was very interesting. Could you summarize it? I mean, how did that? What exactly went through your head? What did you learn and unlearn until you arrived there? How did you exactly doubt everything, become a Christian, and then start talking about it?
You talking about the subway video?
Yes, exactly.
Oh, that was cool. We got that one take first try. That was it. We started recording and walked through the station and got it all. I was assuming something went disastrously wrong until we watched it. I was like, hey, it looked like we got everything.
That's what I would be afraid of.
well, people don't know that when I got to the point where I was walking down in this long tunnel, there were a crowd started gathering and following us. And one of my friends who was walking behind the cameraman, was sort of holding people back, because you're walking by and someone's saying all this crazy, insane stuff, and there's a camera following him, and people just started following us and stuff. And so that was so distracting. I'm looking at the camera, but there's all these people here, and they didn't hear what I was saying before, and they're not going to hear what I say later. So all they're hearing is all this insane stuff, and it was very distracting. So I don't know if I was coherent at all. But it worked out okay. Yeah. So Basically, yeah, I grew up as, I don't remember when I officially declared myself to be an atheist. I remember certainly by 14 in my mind, I hadn't said anything to like my family or anything, but by the age of 14, I was officially like, okay, atheism is my position. But I don't remember believing in God before that either. But anyway, that's how I grew up. But unlike most atheists, I had some mental health issues, which if you don't end up seeing a psychiatrist, then no one explains to you that, hey, we know what this is, and we know why this is a problem, and you're not the only one with this problem. There are other people who have this problem, and we could talk to you about your problem. If you don't have a psychiatrist telling you, explaining things, then you're kind of trying to figure it out yourself, and you can end up making some big mistakes along the way trying to figure out what's going on inside your head. So anyway, I grew up as an atheist, and sort of on the nastier end, in terms of I wasn't just an atheist. I like really despised people. I thought we're like disgusting accidents, right? And it was like offensive to me to think that we're actually important when you've got this huge universe and we're these just insignificant little blobs of cells, thinking everything we do is important. No, I didn't see the problem. I didn't see the contradiction between that belief, namely that things are meaningless and everything is really pointless, and no matter what we do, if you spend your entire life helping people, you haven't really changed anything in the big scheme of things. From, if you were an axe murderer, it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
Not noticing the planet is going to exist long after we've gone extinct. So what is all, what's it all matter here? So I didn't notice a contradiction between believing that and eventually concluding that I'm the most important, greatest human being, and the next level of humanity. And the way I came to that was going back really, really far. I talked about this a little in that testimony video, but the first time it hit me, I don't remember if I was 5 or 6, but my dog died, and my mom was crying over my dog when she hated my dog, and I hated her cat, but I liked my dog, and when my dog died, got hit by a bus, I was thinking, so what? It's just a dog. Why is she getting teary-eyed over this? And then over time, I saw other people get sad when something dies, when their pet dies, when their dad or mom die or something like this. I saw that people get upset over these things, and I really couldn't understand. I mean, and if you think about it, emotions aside, if you think about it, why would you get upset over someone dying? Yeah, you're never going to see them again or something like that, but did you expect that they were going to live forever? Hey, this is going to happen with every single person in your life, apart from you dying before that, right? That's what were you expecting here? So it's on a rational level that made perfect sense, but it did tend to bother people. So I thought there was something wrong with people, and eventually trying to get a time frame in my mind, because I can remember actually thinking certain things in certain spots, like in a classroom or something like this. But I believe I was about 10th to 11th grade. I started coming to conclude that I was a new level in humanity. Like, these emotions, these feelings, things like remorse, guilt, concern for other people, they had their place. They helped the herd survive for thousands of years, and now, well, they're kind of obsolete. And so I've evolved to a new level of humanity where these things are no longer necessary. And so if you start thinking like that, well, then you conclude that you're the best, most important person in the history of humanity. And the reason I say that's a contradiction is, if we are really meaningless blobs of cells and nothing we really do matters, well, guess what? Nothing I could ever do would matter as well. But I was still a couple of years away from spotting the contradiction there. Did you want to?
Can you relate now much better to that, what you didn't understand about people being sad about such losses?
Well,
I mean, loss of life, for example.
Well, the difference is now I regard myself as defective, right? Like now I regard myself as there's something wrong with me. So before I was thinking, oh, there's something wrong with you all, and I'm the superior one here. I'm the one. I've got some ability that you all lack. I've got the ability to just respond rationally and logically when things happen. You guys don't have that ability. Whereas now I regard it as, okay, you guys are the normal ones. I'm defective somehow. There's a part of my brain that doesn't work. Like, you know, you could be born blind, you could be born deaf, you could be born autistic, you could be born with all sorts of things that would set you apart from other people. But now I would regard it as I'm defective. So if someone else is having an emotional reaction to something, yes, I don't think that, oh, you're weak or defective in some way. I think, okay, if I'm not responding in the same way, there's something wrong with me here.
Yeah. What about the beginning? I mean, I'm stuck at one point. You said that you didn't know, or you don't know when actually you started to call yourself an atheist. But what about the background of your upbringing? What about your parents? I mean, were you taught about life outside of this, about God, about Christianity, and this and that, or didn't you have any such education in your childhood at all, and that's why you ended up being an atheist?
Come from a pretty rough background. people don't. Occasionally, I'll mention it, but I'll give you some examples because I talk. You know, in my video, I talk about my dad and stuff like this, and but when I was born, my dad was at that time a drug dealer. I just found this out recently because my dad talked about when he started straightening out, because he used to sell like weed and this is before like crack became huge and stuff. But it was just weed, acid, and pills, stuff like this. But he was apparently living pretty large, and they would take trips to Mexico and then come back. And he eventually got caught for the second time when they raided his place. And he was only 17. He was 17. They raided his place, and he told me that he got caught with 6 pounds of marijuana that he brought back. This was only like a month ago. I was talking to my mom, and I said, "Hey, you tell me the story of that time when Dad got caught with the 6 pounds." She goes, "6? More like 60. So I was talking to Mom, and then she told me the whole story there. But at that time, my mom was 15, and she was on probation for an arson attack on a cop's house and shooting into the house, which someone shot into the house with a shotgun, and it hit a baby in the leg. Right, oh. So the baby survived and stuff, but got hit in the leg. To be clear, my mom wasn't doing any of that. She's just with I get it. She's with the people who are doing it. So she's on probation when she's pregnant with me, and police storm my dad's apartment. And anyway, she's telling me about her trying to hold the door closed while my dad shoves all the drugs down the heating vent and stuff like that. And so anyway, that was that background. And Mom and Dad didn't last, and I kind of ended up going back and forth between them for years. So never really got to settle down in one particular place, because mom would sometimes move like 3 times in a year. So jumping around place to place. And then I would be going back and forth between her and live with my dad in a different state. So never really had a lot of stability, but I would go. So neither one of them seemed to care. If you asked either one of them, hey, do you actually believe in God? Do you actually believe in Jesus? They would have said yes, but it wasn't a big, like my dad used to say, he's God. If people would say, oh my God, he'd go, yes, what do you need? So Dad was kind of a blasphemer. Mom wasn't a big issue. So the only time I would ever go to church or anything would be with my grandma, when I would stay with my grandma. And so my grandma it was like the worst time the worst time ever. It was this Episcopalian church in Morgantown, West Virginia, which they're perfectly nice, but you're a kid and they're just boring you out of your mind. They don't even give like sermons like that you could understand. It's not quite like Gregorian chanting and stuff like this, but it's the sermons were more of recitations and chanting. And so I would just sit on the edge of this pew and stare at this clock beside me. I would always sit beside the clock, so I would know how much time I had to live through this. And at the end was cool, because as soon as they ended it, I would bolt downstairs, because there were always like brownies and donuts down there. So that was the good part. But Yeah, so that was the background. As far as again, it's at 14 where I can actually remember affirming myself as an atheist, and I was probably maybe 15 or 16 when I told my other family members except for my grandma, and no one else would let me tell my grandma because they're like, you're gonna break her old heart there with this stuff. So
So later you came to Christianity. I believe, as far as I remember, that was in prison, right?
that was in jail. For those who don't know the difference, jail is like when you're going to court and they have you more locally, and then when they send you to a place on a more permanent basis, they send you to prison. So yeah, I went to jail for attacking my dad with a hammer, and so I attacked my dad with a hammer and left him for dead. He actually survived, so I wasn't charged with murder. I was charged with, it's what's called malicious wounding. It's you do damage to someone attempting to disfigure them or kill them. And so I was charged with malicious wounding, was found guilty, went to jail. And in the jail, I met this Christian named Randy who was in there. He had turned himself in for 21 felonies. This is a guy who grew up, was doing, lots of stupid stuff, and became a Christian eventually, joined the military, and he was out on a boat somewhere and decided that he was going to go turn himself in for everything he had done. So he's sitting here in this jail cell, and not a cell, this was a dorm. And I started up a discussion with him one day. Because I noticed he wouldn't watch the fights, right? This was the only thing interesting to do in this dorm, was watch fights that happened like every day. And this was 3E, the dorm, and they called us the bang block because they would, like, every day they were hauling people out of there on stretchers from all the fighting in there. And I noticed this one Christian guy who wouldn't look. He wouldn't even look over at the fight when it's going on. And so anyway, seemed like an interesting fellow. But one day he was up there reading his Bible, and I walked up to him and I said, this is what I said this because this is what I thought when I was growing up. I said, hey, you know why you're reading the Bible? You're reading your Bible because you're born in the United States. If you'd been born anywhere else, you believe in something else. If you've been born in China, you'd be a Buddhist. If you've been born in India, you'd be a Hindu. If you've been born in Saudi Arabia, you'd be a Muslim, because people like you believe whatever you're taught to believe. And I'd said that. I'd said similar things to Christians before, because that's how it seems, right? But you got Muslims over there, you've got Buddhists over there, you've got Hindus over here. Why do you grow up and believe in Christianity?
But that's the most basic thing that you think when you look at a map of religious distribution around the world. Yeah.
And so that makes perfect sense to you, and you want to help your, this Christian guy realize why he actually believes something. It's not because it's true. It's because he was just raised in an area where that happens to be the popular view. And so what happened was this guy actually put up a fight. That was the difference right there. I had been saying things like that to Christians for couple years at this point, where I was becoming more vocal. If it was usually just friends and stuff. Hey, why do you really believe this? But never really got a response from Christians. My grandma was the first person to actually ever give me anything that actually looked like an argument. She was an operating room technician, and she was just she just looked at her hand one day and she goes, if you think about how complex and sophisticated something like the hand is, just the hand, and that as soon as you think something, you can do it and stuff, and how difficult it would be for an engineer to come up with anything remotely like this. I mean, it's just amazing. I was like, okay, well, I see your point. I don't agree with it, but I see that you actually have there's a point there to be made. But that was that was the closest I ever got to an argument from a Christian. And Randy was he wasn't giving me piles of evidence. He would make arguments because he'd studied a little apologetics, but it was more him questioning things that I would say, because for some reason, when people make claims, we tend to think that this person knows what they're talking about. If we don't know that they're wrong, right? So in other words, if you're hanging out with your friends and your friends make some claim, did you know in 1452, blah, 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 people think, oh, this person knows what he's talking about, when it could be complete nonsense. And so Randy would just, hey, where'd you get that? Oh, why do you think that? Or I would say something and go, really? And he kept asking me, probing me further. And it started clicking to me that I hadn't really been given a case for anything I was saying. I had just absorbed it from somewhere. So for instance, if I were saying, oh, come on, all scientists agree that life can form on its own with no problem. If you just had enough time and the right molecules, you can get that sort of thing. Weird stuff happens. I would say something like that. And he would go, really? All scientists? And, it would cross my mind. I have no idea what all scientists believe. I haven't polled all scientists. I haven't been shown polls of all scientists. I'm just blurting this out in the discussion. And so he would he kept doing that. And it made me start thinking, where am I actually getting these beliefs, right? Like about the origin of life or about the universe. Where am I getting these beliefs? And it started occurring to me that I just kind of picked them up over time without you. This is the problem that Descartes noticed that he brings up in the Meditations, that you can think of it like Secret Service, right? So think of it in terms of Secret Service protecting the president. If the president's speaking somewhere, and the Secret Service is checking people as they go into this speaking event, and Secret Service is putting people through metal detectors and they're checking them. If they're doing that, and all of a sudden at this rally, someone pulls out an AK-47 in the audience, that doesn't just tell you that this person with the AK-47 is a threat. This tells you that anyone might be a threat, because your method of checking people who are going into this event is flawed. It's somehow flawed. If someone got through your defenses, your security measures with an AK-47, then your method is flawed. For all you know, every person in there has an AK-47. And beliefs are kind of like this. If you are letting beliefs into your head and not checking them properly, which when we're young, no one's checking things properly. No one, not Christians, not Muslims, not atheists. No one is checking things properly.
Most of them don't. Yeah, most of them, I would say.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've never met a kid who has a properly functioning system in place for making sure that no false beliefs get into his head. But it's once you start thinking, hey, did I really investigate that before I believed it? Did I really investigate that before I believed it? And then it becomes, oh no, I could be wrong about pretty much everything, up to and including my entire world view here. And what that really did is it made me want to start studying more, because I still thought I was right. I may have picked up some things along the way that I didn't properly investigate, but I still believe that upon investigating them, I would find out that I'm right. And so Randy and we eventually got into the only fasting battle that I've ever heard of, where he would fast a certain number of days. And he said, look, when I get out of here, I'm not going to have the opportunity to fast for 7 or 10 days at a time. So I'm going to fast as much as I can while I have the opportunity. And so I was shocked. I'd never seen anyone fast before. And this guy went 7 days on nothing but water. And so I was watching that and watching this guy, and he's giving me his trays every day. So they bring him meal trays and he gives them to me, because we become friends over time, having discussions. And I started thinking, I have to be stronger than this Christian. I have to be mentally stronger than this Christian. If I'm this great person that I think I am, I have to be a tougher, stronger person than this Christian. And so he went 7 days, and I'd never fasted before in my life, but I went 10 days, nothing but water. The first fast I ever did. And then I ate for like 2 or 3 days, and then I did another 10-day fast just to rub it in. And so anyway, we kept going back and forth, and he would fast a certain number of days, and I would fast a certain number of days.
And eventually he took you on his side.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that guy went 40 days. Eventually he went 32 days on nothing but water. And then he started drinking Kool-Aid, and then he made it to 40 days. And so that was very impressive. He told me that Jesus had done it. So I said, all right, I'm going 42. And so I was going to go an even 6 weeks. And what's stupid is this is just to beat a Christian, right? I'm trying to beat a Christian here. Whatever he does, I have to be able to outdo him. And so I was on. I forget what day I was on when I passed out in front of the guards. I needed some form, and the guard said he had one, and so I stood up and passed out and busted my head in the dorm there. And a guy, Jeff, told me because I woke up and everyone's like looking down at me, and Jeff said I got up and was walking towards the guard, and I stopped, and he said, then it looked like you were a snake standing on its tail, and then boom, you just went straight down. But so the guard started looking into things there, and I was on the 11th day, and that's when they looked into my mental health history and concluded that maybe I'm trying to kill myself because I'm not all there. And so they stuck me in a camera cell. That's where you're in a little cell, but you have a camera pointed at you all the time. So you have someone monitoring you to make sure you don't, hang yourself or do anything else stupid. Mm-hmm. So it was back there, and I got back there, and I thought, this is a good time to study. You have a cool library. You can get any books you want from the library. They'll bring them by. So
how long did you do that? How long did you study there?
Where in that cell?
Yeah.
At least several months, because I kept going back and forth where I would fast a certain amount of time, and then I would give up, and then I would think that I was weak for deciding to eat again, and so I would go back. So I was doing that for a while, but I mean, back then I was reading the dialogues of Plato, the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. Epictetus was my favorite. Epictetus was one of the last of the great Stoic philosophers, but that guy was a slave who his master had beaten him so severely as he was disabled. He was permanently disabled, and eventually got his freedom and went off and started his own philosophy school. But Stoicism is great if you're a diagnosed psychopath. You ever want to help a psychopath, share some Stoicism with him, because the Stoics are all, you have to do things out of a sense of duty. You have to do the right thing out of a sense of duty. Screw your feelings. Your feelings are irrelevant. Your feelings are only going to hinder you. Do things out of a sense of duty. And a psychopath is capable of doing that, right? You're not going to get anywhere if you start saying, oh, be more compassionate. They can't. That part of their brain doesn't work. But you can show them that they can do the right thing without having those feelings. Anyway, so I was reading those things, but also reading. I was going through these Bible studies I got from the chaplain. Some of the they were like science books that Randy gave me, which, looking back on it now, I know that they were apologetics books and so on. But glancing through them and so on, and anyway, that's what I was studying back then.
How did you come to? Okay, you went to Christianity from there. Mm-hmm. How did you get exactly from there to focusing on Islam, to criticizing Islam, to creating this YouTube channel about Islam? How did that happen?
Yeah, well, so in the cell there, yeah, I eventually, and people can go watch that video referring to if they want more on that, but came across a kind of design argument, a kind of moral argument, and then Jesus' resurrection, which made me rethink everything. And eventually at that point, I was just thinking, all right, what have I got to lose here? If I believe in Christianity and it turns out to be false, then at least I'll know it. So started with that a little bit later. Once I started actually studying apologetics and knowing what it was, I was just completely interested in responses to atheist arguments. So things like the problem of evil or arguments for the existence of God. That's all I was really interested in. So had no interest in Islam. But as many people know, there are Muslim groups in prisons, and in the prison I was at, Muslims were not like a main group. It was more offshoots. So the main group, as far as anything associated with Islam, is called the 5% Nation of Islam. So the Nation of Islam is an American racist offshoot of Islam, and the 5% is a more radical offshoot of them. But that was like the dominant. That's probably the dominant group. But apart from Christians, it was 5%ers in prisons in Virginia.
I wouldn't even call them really Islam. Would you?
No,
I mean,
no. They would get killed in a Muslim country.
Yeah.
The 5%ers say that basically the black man is God and the white man is the devil. And the white man was created when a two-brained scientist named Yaqub grafted the skin of a pig on a person and made the white man and stuff like this. So anyway, yeah, they have and they would speak in this language that they think people couldn't figure out, but we all figured it out. So we would all know what their code language was. So anyway, it was 5%ers in there. Muslims weren't a terribly big group, but later I became friends with the imam among the inmates. So his name was Anthony. And now Anthony, I don't think I've ever said a lot of this, by the way, but Anthony Barnhill, you can if you look up crimes in the 90s, you can go back and find this dude. But Anthony had shot a pastor and stabbed his wife. Whoa. No, this is before he was a Muslim. So he wasn't a Muslim when he did this. He converted to Islam in either in jail or in prison. But he was pretty cool, pretty smart guy when I started having discussions with him. And anyway, we became like weightlifting partners. So we would go and lift weights and argue about Christianity and Islam. And for again, there's a lot of new information for people who even if you watched my videos before, I'm not sure I talked about this, but back then there was a Christian bulletin board. Each of the religious groups, 5%ers didn't have one, but Christians had their own bulletin board in the cafeteria, and Muslims had a bulletin board, and there were a couple other groups that had their bulletin boards. But we had one that was right where people stood in line to get your meal. There was a bulletin board there, and something happened where a guy named Satterwhite, who was one of the coolest Christians I've ever met in my life. He's a former Nation of Islam member. So he grew up in the Nation of Islam and then eventually became a Christian, and super cool, super nice. But he just put a note that was like, the top of a sheet of paper. And he just wrote in pen on there, there are many false paths, but then there's, the true path to Christianity. And he said something about the other false paths. And he mentioned Islam on there. And like 8 Muslims surrounded him on the recreation field. And they surrounded him. They're like, hey, why you put that up on the bulletin board? And he said, he's like, oh, and just stating what I believe. And they're like, no, you're trying to start a problem here. And so they basically surrounded him and intimidated him, and he took it down. And so anyway, I really didn't like, it wouldn't have mattered that they were Muslims. It could have been anyone. If you surround someone 8 or 9 on one or something like this and tell them to do something, instead of they could have walked up to him and just said, hey, why don't you take that down? Some guys don't like it or something like that. The fact that they surrounded him on the ball field where they're, it's looking like they're about to pound his face in if he doesn't do what they want, it kind of ticked me off. So I went to Satterwhite and I said, I don't like what they did there. Why don't you put me in charge of that bulletin board? And then I'll put something up, and then if they come bother you, then tell them to come to me. And so he did that, and I made this giant serpent head. It's kind of messed up. So I made this giant snake head, and it was coming out of the side of the bulletin board, and he had a word bubble beside him, and it said, "Hiss, Jesus was just a prophet. Trust me," right? And so
I see.
And so at this point, I don't know anything about Islam. I don't care about Islam. I mess with people who mess with other people, right? If you're trying to bully someone, then I'm gonna mess with you. And so Satterwhite walks up to me and he says, oh, so they came up to me over that sign. I said, did you tell them that I put it up? He goes, yeah, I told them. And so I'm thinking, okay, any day I'm about to get surrounded by these guys. And they never came, right? They never came and messed with me. Instead, I got called into the warden's office, and the warden said, I received several complaints about this sign you put up attacking Islam. And I was like, oh, okay. So he goes, I want you to take that down. And I go, okay, all right, I'll take it down, sir. That sign will never appear again. Now, for people who don't understand prison culture, the worst thing you can possibly do is go to the authorities, right? That's like worse than a child molester in prison. Someone who goes and complains to the police about stuff that another inmate. That's snitching. That's called snitching, right? You're going to the authorities over something that an inmate is doing. So anyway, so I put up a big sign, and I said, members of a certain religious group were upset about our character Zach the Serpent and him saying that Jesus was just a prophet. What these members of this religious group don't know is that if you have a problem with what another inmate does, you should go to that inmate and not go to the warden, right? So I basically called them all snitches. And what was cool there was some of the you had different kind of inmates. You had like new young inmates who don't understand the rules when they come in, and you have like older inmates, the old heads. Even the older Muslims were like, "Nah, he's right. He's right. You should not have gone to the warden over this." So there were some cool older Muslims who were saying, "This guy's absolutely right. You guys should never have gone to the warden about this stuff." And so basically, I called them all snitches, and now they're really enraged. And I'm thinking every day, I'm thinking, okay, now they're just going to clock me, right? Because they have to restore their prison honor here. And so I'm walking around every day thinking, when are these guys going to clock me? And they never did. And I found out from my bunkmate who heard it from one of the Muslims. He said, our imam told us not to go near the guy, right? So my friend Anthony Barnes, and it wasn't that he was trying to protect me. We'd had so many discussions on Christianity and Islam, which back then, I hadn't read the Quran, I hadn't read the Hadith, but he would give me arguments, and I would go look them up, and I would go back, and I would say, hey, this is a stupid argument here that you're using. And he would give me tracts, and I would go look up the tracts. It was actually cool. He had good qualities. He gave some tracts that were given these really bad Islamic arguments against Christianity. And I would go up to him and I would say, hey, it says that the Hebrew for this word means this and stuff. Look, here's the Hebrew right here. Here's the dictionary. This doesn't mean what your tract says it means. And they would stop giving out those. He would stop giving out those tracts and stuff. So that was cool. But what he was worried about was me like leading them astray. And like if we actually got into it, if they came up to me and we actually ended up getting into a discussion, he was worried that their faith would be hurt by the discussion. So he told them to stay away from me. And what it ended up doing was I just kind of ended up with a free pass to go around doing things that would have gotten other people hurt at some point.
When did you start actually going into studying Islam?
Yeah, so at that point, I mean, the only book I read before meeting Nabeel in college, the only book I read was Answering Islam by Norm Geisler and Abdul Salim. By the way, awesome book. But by the time I met Nabeel, that was the extent of my research on Islam, was that book. And Islam will sometimes appear as a minor topic in other apologetics books, but hadn't read the Muslim sources. And so I got out of prison a few years after that, and went to college. And there in college, on the speech and debate team, I met a Muslim named Nabeel. And someone named Nabeel, that doesn't tell you a lot about how much of a Muslim he is. Suggests that he has a Muslim background, and his last name Qureshi. That means like from the Quraysh tribe. So I wasn't sure how devout he was, but we ended up on the speech and debate team. Ended up sharing a hotel room, and turns out he took Islam very seriously and started challenging me. And the first discussion we had, I let him go hours explaining his beliefs. So I would ask him, what do you believe about God? What do you believe about Jesus? What do you believe about the Bible? What do you believe about the Quran? And he would explain his beliefs. And after several hours, I said, all right, I got one more question. If you're wrong, do you want to know it? Because some people, you ask that and they say no. And no offense, atheists, but it's usually atheists who say that, right? And it's usually I'll say, oh, if you're wrong about God, you want to know it. And they've said, and I've had lots of atheists just say no. I would rather be wrong than believe in your God, or something like that. But Nabeel said yes and no. He said, yes, I would want to know the truth about God, but no, it would destroy my family. And that was interesting to me because, apart from my grandmother, my family wouldn't have cared much at all about what I believed, as long as I was staying out of trouble and not getting locked up. So the fact that what his family believes is a role in whether he wants to know the truth about something, that was pretty new.
That's the case with pretty much every Muslim around the world, especially in the Islamic world.
Yeah, and there are places where it would be true of Christians, and Christians who have very devout families and so on. That would be true of some Christian families, but with Muslims, it's on another level. Like, it's pretty rare for a Christian family to shun. They have to be some really, really diehard Christians who actually shun a child for not, for leaving Christianity or becoming an atheist or something like that. But very common among Muslims. I've heard from lots of people, hey, I told my parents that I was no longer a Muslim, and they told me, don't come back here until you're a Muslim again.
Yeah, that's what many people don't understand, who are like against all religions equally, which is never all religions equally, by the way. But among Christians, we see all the time that people have stopped believing in Christianity and start criticizing and start talking negatively about it, and many of them even try to equate Christianity and Islam as if they were kind of this on the same level evil or something like that. But if you just look at former Muslims, pretty much every former Muslim has a problem with their family because they left Islam. They can't tell their families. They don't even feel safe if they tell their families, or their families will just completely stop supporting them, will throw them out, tell them to go away. While most former Christians don't have that problem at all. In fact, I haven't met any former Christian who has a problem now with their family because he left the faith.
Yeah, and one also common thing is that there will be a period of if you leave Islam, there are families who will take some time and try to convince you to return to Islam. So that's what Nabeel's dad did when he eventually left Islam. He spent about a year taking him to various Muslim scholars to try and convince him that Islam is true. But that is an amazing degree of psychological pressure when you understand that, hey, if I change my belief about this, then my family, and I don't just mean mom and dad or my sister, it's like cousins, aunts, uncles, if they do continue having a relationship with me, the relationship is going to be very, very strained. I'm going to be regarded as a disappointment to them, an embarrassment. It's going to be humiliation for them at the mosque. You're the parents with the kid who left Islam, and it's going to bring a great deal of shame on my family. And if you're a good kid, that affects you, right? People, I mean, unless your parents were total jerks, you don't want to hurt your family. You don't want to put them through that. And so it plays a role. And I got to watch that play out for years with Nabeel. It was always that. It was him. He would look at the argument and try to get to the bottom of the argument and respond to objections and so on. But at the same time, you always saw the psychological pressure that his love for his family.
How did it end up? I mean, did he in the end still have problems with his family because of that, or did they make peace?
Yeah, well, his dad used to again take him around to mosques and so on, trying to convince him back. And then for a while, it was just like really, really intense arguing every time he would talk. I was hanging out with him one day, and he got into an argument with his parents on the phone, and it went like, I don't know, 90 minutes or so, and it was like World War III on the phone. And he finished, and I'm thinking, gosh, that's like the worst stuff ever. And he goes, "This is every time we talk now."
Wow,
man. And so, to be fair, he would kind of poke them. His mom was showing him this picture of this like beautiful Pakistani girl, and said, I can arrange a marriage with her if you return to Islam. And he goes, "So if I return to Islam, you can arrange a marriage with 4 of them." So that would upset her. So But eventually, and I think it was mainly when he had a daughter. He had a daughter named Aya, and the third generations usually help smooth things over, because even though you can be mad about what your son did, you're going to love your granddaughter. So that they tended to smooth things out after that, in terms of, let's just have a truce while we're together and stuff. And so his family got along with him after that. But Nabeel was the one who got me studying the Muslim sources, and it would be to respond to his arguments, because he would be giving his arguments based on Muhammad's miraculous scientific insights, but he wouldn't just be using the Quran. Most Muslims point to passages in the Quran which are supposedly miraculous scientific insights, but he's pointing to things that Muhammad would say, and that Muhammad couldn't have been aware of these things, and Muhammad is making these predictions of things that were happening that wouldn't happen for more than 1,000 years into the future. And so it's amazing prophetic knowledge about how things would turn out. And so the only way to really look into those is to get the sources. And so that's when I started buying Sahih Muslim and Sahih al-Bukhari and stuff like that. The first thing I did when I wanted to start looking into the life of Muhammad was I looked up what's the earliest source on the life of Muhammad, and it was Ibn Ishaq. So it's Ibn Ishaq's Sirat Rasulullah. Mm-hmm. So I got that and started reading, but then I would bring passages to Nabeel, and I would say, hey, this contradicts what you were saying about your prophet. Look at this. And then he said, no, you can't go to Ibn Ishaq. You have to go to the major hadith collections, which was confusing to me, right? It's like, wait, if you're not trusting things, you can't know more later than you did earlier, right? You can't know more 2 centuries later than you could a century later.
Absolutely.
And so there's a problem. And if the guys who are writing a century after the events have been corrupted, well, guess what? They're the guys filtering information for guys in the following century. So you've got a problem here. But he was convinced that people like Bukhari and Muslim had a superior methodology, because they had isnad criticism and the standard methods, which back then when Ibn Ishaq was writing this wasn't, the methodology wasn't standardized yet. So you had a variety of different methods competing for how you do Islamic history. Later, the hadith collectors convinced people that they had the correct way of doing Islamic history. And by the time you get down to today, there are Muslims who will say that's the only way to do history, even though it's like the silliest method I've ever seen for doing history ever.
Did you see a difference between Nabeel's way of looking at his own religion and the mainstream religion? I mean, I'm asking this because many people, especially Muslim apologists online, will tell you things like, well, Nabeel was Ahmadi, which doesn't count as Muslim, so he's not practically an ex-Muslim, and stuff like that. How do you think, was he different from other Muslims? Was that really the case?
No, and unless he would refer to his sect or to his sect being persecuted. But when we're having discussions, he's arguing that the Quran is the word of God, and that Muhammad is Allah's prophet, and they view Mirza Ghulam Ahmed as what they call the promised Messiah. So, by the way, for people who don't know, because people compare Ahmadis to Islam in the sense that Mormons are to Christianity, but no, there's a huge difference there. If you're a Mormon, you have fundamental differences on a number of core Christian doctrines that you would have to discuss. Ahmadis believe in a different view of end times, right? So all Muslims believe in someone coming after Muhammad. They believe in the return of Jesus. You have to, as a Muslim, believe that Jesus is returning. Well, Ahmadis just believe that it already happened. I think it's silly. I think it's a silly belief. But they still believe in all 5 pillars. They still believe in the 6 articles of faith. They still believe in all the basics of Islam. They have a different view of end times, and it does affect their interpretations, because now you have the interpretations of the promised Messiah. And so if he says this Quran verse means such and such, then you are kind of bound by that interpretation as an Ahmadi. But in terms of the way Nabeel argued, I can't think of any way that Nabeel's arguing was different from your average Muslim apologist today. He's still arguing perfect preservation of the Quran. He's arguing scientific miracles in the Quran and in the life of Muhammad. He's arguing that Muhammad is the greatest man who's ever lived. So well, there is a slight difference when it comes to objections to Christianity, because Ahmadis believe that Jesus was put on a cross, but that he survived.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but you even find other Muslims who hold that position.
One thing I noticed about Ahmadi is that that many of them interpret problematic Quran verses in a different way to make it kind of, softer, like the verse 34 in chapter 4 about the wife beating, for example. I saw that many Ahmadi sources interpret that as something different than wife beating, and that there is somehow a consensus among Ahmadis about that.
Well, again, if the promised Messiah or one of his successors gives you that interpretation, then you're not in much of a position to object. So they do have cult-like qualities in that sense, in terms of you have a central authority in your religion that you are bound to adhere to. So there was that. But as far as the arguments that he was using, standard Islamic apologetics. And so anyway, that's how I started studying the Muslim sources. It wasn't because I had any tremendous interest in Islam. Again, I was more interested in the objections of atheists. I was more interested in philosophy. I was more interested in almost anything than Islam. It was just when I had a Muslim friend, I would study Islam. And so, but Nabeel's he's pushing all kinds of arguments, which, by the way, this is why certain arguments against Islam, certain arguments for Islam are so successful, is that people don't investigate them, right? So if you show up and you look at this list of these 40 different things that Muhammad knew that were centuries ahead of his time, and he couldn't possibly have known. If you just look at that and you say, "Whoa, this is amazing! This truly is an amazing religion here," and people will convert based on that. For some reason, it never crosses people's minds to say, "Let me go get those sources, and I want to look up everything you just said, and I want to see it in context. I want to see the actual hadith. I want to see exactly what Muhammad said." And because once you do that, you start saying, "He didn't say that." He didn't say, you took one little phrase out of something he said and tried to turn it into an argument. When you look at the actual hadith, and everything he said in the hadith is nonsense, except for that little excerpt that you twisted to mean something else.
Yeah, I can confirm that in my own upbringing. Like I grew up as in a Sufi Muslim family, in a Sufi Sunni Muslim family, and I became a one myself later because I was so much impressed by Islamic sources and by Islamic preachers talking about the end times and prophecies and stuff like that. And when I think about myself back then, when I was so impressed, I saw so many end time prophecies, for example, by Muhammad, so many things that were said, and we can all see them today, and it's all miraculous. It's wonderful. But then when I started actually questioning it and reading about it, I realized that most of it is totally false. Most of it is totally misinterpreted, totally misrepresented by Islamic apologists deliberately, so that you believe in it.
Yeah, and what you just said there is very important, that it's misrepresented by Muslim apologists. And so Nabeel, when he's giving it, Nabeel he's not going to read a hadith and then twist its meaning. He's not that sort of person. What he was doing is he's reading Muslim apologist books and their spin on these passages, and then he's presenting their arguments to me as evidence for Islam. And so then it becomes me going to the actual hadith, finding where Muhammad said this, and then coming back to Nabeel with what is actually said. And so in other words, when a Muslim presents you with some bad information and you see, hey, you said this and I went and looked it up and that's not what it said at all, don't think that the Muslim was trying to trick you. That Muslim probably got that from a Muslim apologist who was twisting the passage. It's like when Muslims say Islam is a religion of peace. Don't automatically jump to he's practicing taqiyya. He might not be practicing taqiyya. He might really probably, if it's a Muslim in the West, he probably sincerely believes that Islam is a religion of peace.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so he's not trying to trick you. He's trying to correct what he regards as your false view. And so so this is a situation with Nabeel. He'd been misled by the arguments of Muslim apologists. But what was cool is, because I got his sources and started looking up the passages, I could then go back to him and say, here's what it really says. And that has a huge impact. You wouldn't see it. I didn't notice it when I was watching. It wasn't until afterwards when he would tell me that this stuff is having an impact on him. But it's basically, if you're a Muslim, you grow up. And if you don't if you don't know everything yourself, you haven't studied the Muslim sources, you look to certain authorities in your religion and say, okay, these guys are the scholars. They've studied things. They know what they're talking about. So let me rely on their arguments. Like lots of Muslims, their faith in Islam isn't based on any personal research. It's based on Zakir Naik sounding good to them.
Absolutely.
And so there's a negative to that, and there's a positive to that. The negative side is just disheartening when, you know, someone can make up a bunch of nonsense and tons of Muslims just mindlessly accept it without ever bothering to examine it. The positive side is that when Muslim apologists spout a bunch of complete nonsense and you are willing to put in the time and actually go through the sources and come back to them, then the Muslim will be looking at that and saying, wait, my Muslim apologist said this, but here's what the actual evidence is. And the actual evidence goes against what the Muslim apologist said. What that does is it starts shaking the real source of their confidence. Their real confidence was in their leaders. So once they start realizing, hey, my leaders can't completely be trusted here, then they get to a point where, hey, maybe I have to look into this for myself. Maybe I can't just accept whatever Zakir Naik says. Maybe I have to start over and start from scratch and really look into this for myself and see whether these arguments are really good or whether they're not. And once someone starts doing that sincerely, I'd say he's on his way out of Islam.
Yeah, I think it's very important what you just said. I think we should even expand that and tell about the importance of that again to the audience. I mean, the way you described people believing in Islam, like relying on the information they get from their scholars and apologists, that's really how most Muslims believe in Islam. And even if Muslims are watching us here, you probably know what we are talking about. I was the same. Many others were the same. Many other Muslims online who defend Islam to death are the same, that they don't actually go and read the Quran for themselves. They don't go and read the Hadith for themselves because the Hadith books are way too long. I don't believe that any Muslim ever does that. I haven't seen any Muslim who ever did that. What most Muslims do is just to pick a favorite Islamic scholar and say, well, this guy tells me that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam did this, or that in the Quran Allah meant actually this when he said this. That's what most Muslims do. That's why, for example, something very common, if you criticize Islam online, you will see that the common Muslim reaction will be, well, you have to go to a scholar to understand that. Mm-hmm. That's how most of them think, and that's the problem. They don't even actually go into that and research it. They only believe what their scholars say. Like Zakir Naik, who's priding himself on his YouTube channel with 17 million followers or something, and he even has a big text about that he has so many subscribers. And that's how most Muslims believe, and that's the actual problem. That's why we are sitting here and talking about all these sources and how it actually is.
And just to be fair, this is true of human beings in general, right? Most human beings don't have an opportunity to go out and study everything for themselves. So we tend to trust people that we would regard as reliable. So Christians can look to their apologists or preachers as reliable. It starts off with regarding your parents as reliable, and then eventually start regarding, hey, William Lane Craig, he knows what he's talking about. If you're I've seen lots of atheists like this who, Dawkins says this, Dawkins says that, Dawkins says this, when it's clear they haven't really gone through anything that he's saying themselves. So people in general are like this. Again, most people just don't have time to go through everything themselves, so they have to rely on other people. But with Islam, it's much more intense, as you pointed out. I can point out anything. I can say, look, here's what Muhammad said. Oh, but you need to go watch Zakir Naik. Well, look, here's what your prophet said, and here's why it's wrong. Oh, well, go to Zakir Naik. What are you talking about? Look this up yourself. Look this up yourself and tell me, give me some sort of defense of this passage. What's also true is Muslims do something in reverse, right? Because they have their confidence in individuals. It's, here's this person I trust, that I've noticed, and you've probably experienced the same thing, that when you give them an argument, a lot of times they'll attack you, the person, and try to discredit you as the person, rather than showing why your argument is right or wrong. So I can give a detailed argument from the hadiths. Say, here's what Muhammad said here. Here's what he said here. And you put all this together, and here's the problem that it raises. And the response is, David's a psychopath, right? He has mental health problems. Don't believe. Wait a minute. My argument does not have mental health problems.
Yeah.
The argument doesn't. That's one premise, and here's another premise, and here's a conclusion, and it follows via this logical law. The argument doesn't have mental problems. So what are you doing? But that's what they're doing, right? Is everything is like a matter of authority to many Muslims, and so they try to attack you as a credible source. But yeah, it's a sad situation. But for Muslims who are actually open. Because think about this. If you're growing up as a Muslim and you've got parents and they're good Muslims, and it's kind of built into Islam that other positions are addressed with apologetics. And what I mean there is certain criticisms of the deity of Christ are built into Islam. They're built into Islam. They're in the Quran. They're in the Hadith. So it's not just, hey, here's some argument that some Muslim came up with later. Viewing other positions as false and flawed is part of the system itself. It's emphasized in the system. And so if you attend mosque all your life, you're already going to have some arguments built into your position against other groups. Whereas, like in Christianity, if a Muslim comes up to a Christian, the Christian might know absolutely nothing about that person's position, not know how to criticize it, but certain criticisms are built into Islam. And so Muslims grow up with, if their families take it at all seriously, they grow up with a certain level of apologetics built into their minds. And eventually they pick their authorities, Zakir Naik or Didat or Yusuf Estes or something like this. They start having confidence in these other people. But if it's a Muslim who is at all open to reason, just by sitting down with the Muslim and looking at what some of these people say and going through it, you can kind of wreak havoc on this person's belief, because lots of times these guys are spouting just complete nonsense. I mean, absolute nonsense. We've played a clip before where Yusuf Estes is explaining the origins of Christianity, and he says that the Catholic Church was started by Alexander the Great in Rome, and people in the audience start, what are you talking about? It's on the Vatican's website. Go to the Vatican's website. Now, guess what, everyone? You can go to the Vatican's website and look up